Let me ask you something that has nothing to do with your quarterly targets and everything to do with the world your children will inherit. Who do you think should decide the rules of outer space? Yes, we're going to talk about the space today. Should it be governments, the same governments that took 70 years to agree on a climate framework they are currently dismantling? Should it be a private company run by a single individual who can, in his own words, collapse an entire nation's front line by turning off a satellite switch? Should it be China, a state that has signed space cooperation agreements with over 19 countries, is building the only space station that will exist after 2031, and has a crewed moon landing program running on schedule, while the American equivalent keeps getting delayed? Or should it be nobody, a lawless frontier governed by whoever gets there first, plants a flag, and controls the infrastructure everyone else needs to function? Because here's the thing, those are not hypothetical questions for a geopolitical seminar. They are the actual choices being made right now, not in parliaments, not by international treaty, not through democratic deliberation, but by engineers in South Texas, by military planners in Beijing, by billionaires with personal vision of humanity's future that have never been put to a single vote anywhere on Earth. The new space race is the most consequential power competition of the 21st century and is being run almost entirely outside your field of vision. Today, we are going to change that because the leaders who understand what is actually happening up there will navigate the next decade with clarity. The ones who don't will be managed by forces they never saw coming. Welcome to the H2H experiment. I am Joao and I am your host. Today, we go to the largest arena on Earth and beyond. This is not a science podcast. This is a leadership podcast. This is a self-improvement podcast. And what is happening in space right now is the single most important leadership story of our era, because it is a story about who gets to write the rules of the world that comes next. Stay with me. This one will change how you see everything. To understand what is actually at stake here, you need to understand that there is not one space race happening right now. There are three. And they are not racing towards the same finish line. Let's talk about the players. The first one, Elon Musk and the private sovereign. In 2024, SpaceX completed 138 rocket launches, accounting for more than half of every orbital launch conducted by any country or company on the entire planet. Let that number land for a moment. 138. One private company, owned by one single person, conducted more than half of all human activity in space in a single year. By 2025, that has risen to 165 orbital flights, a new record in a 6th consecutive record-breaking year. In October 2024, SpaceX achieved something that looked like science fiction. The Super Heavy booster, after launching Starship into space, flew itself back to the launch tower and was caught by mechanical arms, a feat of engineering precision that even SpaceX's competitors struggled to process. Starship is not just a rocket. It is the infrastructure for a civilizational project. Musk's stated primary goal is the multiplanetary colonization of humanity, beginning with Mars. He's not building a launch vehicle. He's building the transport network for the first human civilization beyond Earth. Now, here's where this stops being science fiction and starts being political philosophy. Musk is not a government. He was not elected. He controls no territory on Earth. through democratic mandate. And yet, through SpaceX and its Starlink satellite network, which is the communications backbone of an active war in Europe, he exercises the kind of strategic power that previously only nation states possessed. Musk himself acknowledged this with a directness that should alarm every political scientist and leadership thinker on the planet. When questioned about Starlink's role in Ukraine, he stated publicly, Starlink is the backbone of the Ukrainian army. Their entire front line would collapse if I turned it off. Elon Musk, public statement on X 2025. And he has exercised that leverage. In 2022, when Ukraine requested that Musk activate Starlink coverage over Russian-occupied Crimea to enable a counteroffensive, he refused, citing escalation concerns. The decision was consequential enough to be discussed between the U.S. National Security Advisor and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. One person's business judgment altered the course of a war. The story gets more complex still. Peer-reviewed academic research published in Political Geography by Joshua Abels, 2024, documented that Musk's decisions were influenced not just by state escalation concerns, but by economic pressure from Beijing. China made clear that SpaceX's posture over Ukraine had implications for Tesla's Gigafactory Shanghai. Musk himself confirmed he received pressure from the Chinese government. A private individual running what is effectively global communications infrastructure was simultaneously managing pressure from the Chinese government, American military, and a wartime president with no democratic mandate and no adequate governance framework. In early 2025, U.S. negotiators allegedly threatened to limit Ukraine's Starlink access if it did not accept a critical minerals deal. Musk denied a direct linkage, but as Foreign Policy reported, the credibility of the threat and the anxiety it generated in Kyiv mattered more than its precise contours. This is not a critique of Musk personally. It is an observation about what happens when private infrastructure achieves strategic scale with no governance framework adequate to contain it. Now, the second player, China and the long game. While Western media obsesses over Starship launches, China has been executing the most disciplined and strategically sophisticated space program in human history. In June 2024, China's Chang'e 6 mission returned samples from the far side of the moon, a feat never accomplished by any nation ever. The far side cannot communicate directly with Earth. China first had to deploy a relay satellite. This is not a symbolic achievement. It is a demonstration of operational capability that maps directly to the requirements of a permanent lunar base. China's Tiangong space station has been continuously crewed since 2022. The International Space Station is scheduled for decommission in 2031. When that happens, Tiangong will be the only operational space station in orbit. China has invited all United Nations members to participate. 17 countries have already signed agreements. China has set a target of a crewed moon landing before 2030. Its Long March 10 rocket, Mengzhou spacecraft, and Lanyue lunar lander are all in active deployment. The Georgetown University Center for Security and Emerging Technology assessed in December 2025 that China is on track to fully achieve its stated space strategy goals by 2027. And China is not just building rockets, it is building a space-based geopolitical bloc. Its Beidou navigation system, a direct rival to GPS, achieved full operational capability in 2020 with 49 satellites. Every system that connects to Beidou is dependent on Chinese infrastructure. China has signed over 46 space cooperation agreements with more than 19 countries and international organizations. It has launched satellites for partner nations, built ground stations, trained engineers, and created strategic dependencies that mirror its terrestrial belt and road logic. The strategic ambition is not simply to be the first on the moon. It is to be the nation that writes the rules of space, the governance frameworks, the resource rights, the technical standards, and the alliance structures. And now, the third player, the US. The United States remains the most capable space nation on Earth by most technical measures, but it is facing an institutional coherence crisis more dangerous than any rocket gap. NASA's Artemis program has been delayed repeatedly. Artemis 2 has been pushed to April 2026, which we have all followed on TV and on the internet. Artemis 3, the crewed lunar landing, to mid-2027 at the earliest. The delays reflect deeper pathologies of large government procurement, cost overruns, contractor delays, political interference in engineering decisions. Meanwhile, the governance of American space power has become entangled in the most extraordinary conflict of interest in modern political history. The same individual who runs the dominant private space company simultaneously holds an official advisory role in the United States federal government. The regulatory agency that oversees SpaceX's launches sits within the same government Musk is officially advising on efficiency. The potential for regulatory capture is not theoretical, it is structural. The United States has allowed the boundary between public interest and private power to dissolve so completely that it is no longer clear who, in America, is actually accountable for the direction of humanity's most consequential civilizational project. Now, here's the question worth asking. If this is so important, why aren't more leaders paying attention? And more than that, why the fuck is this relevant for you as a leader, and how this information can help you shape a better leadership for your team? Hold on, we'll get there. The answer is neurological before it is cultural. The human brain's threat detection system evolved to respond to proximate, visible, immediate threats. Our brains are exquisitely calibrated for short-range threat perception and dangerously under-equipped for long-range civilizational risk assessment. Psychologists call this temporal discounting, the neurologically hardwired tendency to radically undervalue events that occur in the future relative to events that occur now. Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2017 for his work on behavioral economics, demonstrated that humans systematically prefer smaller immediate rewards over larger future ones, even when the mathematics of the future rewards are objectively superior. The so-called delayed gratification is, in its essence, counterintuitive for the human brain. This is why the average CEO's strategic planning horizon is 3 to 5 years, why the average political cycle is 4, why the questions being settled right now, who controls orbital infrastructure, who writes space law, who owns the moon's resources, register as background noise against the quarterly results that determine whether the CEO keeps their job this year. The space race is not a distraction from your strategic priorities. It is a clarifying lens for them. The leaders who understand it will make better decisions about technology, geopolitical risk, and the infrastructure their organizations depend on. But there is a philosophical question at the heart of the space race that almost nobody is asking directly. And it is the most important one. Who has the right to write the rules of the next version of human civilization? Think about it. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 is still the foundational legal document governing human activity in space, states that outer space is the province of all mankind. No nation can claim sovereignty over the moon or other celestial bodies. But the treaty was written before private companies existed as space actors. Nobody was even giving a fuck about it because at that time it was not even thinkable. It governs states. It says nothing definitive about whether a private company can mine an asteroid, nothing about who gets satellite communications in a war, nothing about who owns the lunar South Pole's water ice, the raw material for rocket fuel, and therefore the key to controlling deep space logistics. The Artemis Accords, promoted by NASA since 2020, represent the American approach. Bilateral agreements establishing behavioral norms in space, effectively extending the Western rules-based order into orbit. 47 countries have signed. China and Russia have not, obviously. China and Russia's counter is the International Lunar Research Station, a competing framework that positions itself as an alternative to American-led governance. Two incompatible visions of how humanity will organize itself in space are being institutionalized right now, in real time. And embedded within the American side is a complication the framers of the Outer Space Treaty could not have imagined. The dominant private actor has described his preference, Martian governance, as a direct democracy where laws sunset automatically. A system designed by whoever gets there first, operating entirely beyond Earth's existing legal frameworks. This is the explicit stated intention of the person who controls the only rocket currently capable of getting humanity to Mars. Now, Marcus Aurelius, who was himself the most powerful person in the known world at his time, wrote in his Meditations that the purpose of power was service to the common good, and that the greatest danger of power was the corruption of the individual who held it. He wrote, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." The question the ancient Stoics would have asked is not whether an individual is capable or intelligent or well-intentioned. It is whether any single person, however extraordinary, should have this much unaccountable power over the future of the species. In February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Within 48 hours, a Russian cyber attack destroyed the Viasat satellite network that Ukrainian military forces depended on. Ukraine's Minister of Digital Transformation publicly requested Musk's help. Within hours, Musk activated Starlink. Within weeks, it had become the backbone of the Ukrainian military communications, government operations, and civilian connectivity. But the story did not end there. 6 months later, SpaceX sent a letter to the Pentagon stating it could no longer fund Ukraine's service. The cost for the remainder of 2022 alone, $120 million. For a full year, nearly $400 million. A private company had inserted itself as critical military infrastructure, then presented the bill to the government. The United States, with no real alternative, paid. Then Ukraine requested Starlink coverage over Crimea to guide kamikaze sea drones toward the Russian fleet. Musk refused, citing escalation concerns. The refusal was discussed between the U.S. National Security Advisor and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Then, in February 2023, SpaceX restricted Starlink for all offensive military operations. One private company had unilaterally set the rules of engagement for satellite communications in a war. No treaty authorized it. No parliament voted on it. No court could challenge it. Decisions made inside a company by engineers applying commercial access policies altered the tactical balance in an active war. The governing logic was a firm's terms of service. Foreign Policy, March 2026. And then the final layer. Academic research documented, and Musk himself confirmed, that he received pressure from Beijing about his Starlink posture. China's concerns about Ukraine had implications for Tesla's Gigafactory Shanghai, as we have spoken before. The world's most powerful private space operator was simultaneously fielding pressure from the Chinese government, the American military, and a wartime Ukrainian president, with formal accountability to none of them. This is the world that emerges when private infrastructure achieves strategic scale with no adequate governance. And it is the world your organization is operating in today. Now, let me connect this directly to your leadership, because I don't want you to think that this is all bullshit that has nothing to do with you and your leadership. And everything I've described is not background noise. It is the operating environment of every significant organization on Earth. First, understand that infrastructure is power, and your organization depends on infrastructure you do not control. What infrastructure does your organization depends on that is controlled by a single private actor, a foreign state, or an unaccountable platform? Cloud computing, payment rails, search algorithms, social media distribution. These are the Starlinks of the commercial world. What happens if the person who controls the infrastructure changes the terms of service tomorrow? Second, develop a geopolitical intelligence function, however small. Most organizations treat geopolitics as somebody else's problems, just something happening outside, until it arrives at their door. The leaders who understood in 2021 that supply chains depend on Chinese manufacturing were a strategic vulnerability were not clairvoyant. They were geopolitically literate. You don't need a geopolitical research department. You need a discipline to regularly ask, what are the three macro forces most likely to disrupt our operating assumptions in the next 5 to 10 years? Third, think in timescales that match the challenges. The space race is being run on 50-year timescales. The decisions being made now will constrain the options available to human civilization for generations. Amazon's long-term orientation, Bezos' day one philosophy, produced a company that thought in decade-long investment cycles when every quarterly pressure screamed for short-term results. The same orientation applied to your organization's positioning is the difference between leading a business that adapts and one that gets disrupted. And fourth, take the question of accountability seriously, in space and in your organization. The core crisis of the new space race is an accountability gap. The most consequential actors are operating without adequate governance. Accountability gaps don't only exist in space. They exist in every organization where power has accumulated without adequate checks, where decisions are made without genuine challenge, where oversight has been allowed to atrophy. The H2H standard applies as much to the person who controls the world's satellite network as it does to the person running a 40-person leadership team. Now, let's move to my favorite part of every episode, the H2H experiment of the week. This one I call the long game audit. This week, run one exercise that most leadership teams never attempt. Not because it is technically difficult, but because it requires a quality of attention most organizations are unwilling to sustain. Step 1. Each person writes independently, in silence, what is the most important thing that will be different about the world in 20 years compared to today? And what does that mean for what we need to become? Step 2. Share the answers. No debate, just listening. Map the areas of convergence and the areas of radical divergence. The divergence is most valuable data. It tells you where your leadership team's mental models are most different. Step 3. Ask one question together. If the world we just described actually materializes, what is the single most important decision we need to make in the next 12 months that we are currently not making? And step 4. Write the answer down. Commit to returning to it in 90 days. This exercise will not give you certainty about the future, but it will force your leadership team to operate at the time scale that actually matters, and to make decisions in light of civilizational forces rather than in spite of them. Now, let's wrap up this episode. Here's the truth I want to leave you with. The new space race is not a bullshit story about rockets. It is a story about power, about who gets to write the rules of the world that comes next. And the people writing those rules right now are not waiting for democratic consensus, international agreements, or the approval of institutions that governed the last era. They are launching, building, filing patents on fucking lunar resource extraction, signing bilateral agreements that will determine the governance architecture of space for generations, funding infrastructure that will either extend the open, rules-based order into orbit or replace it with something completely altogether different. You cannot personally launch a fucking rocket, but you can lead with the kind of civilizational literacy this moment demands. You can build organizations that think in timescales adequate to the challenges. You can ask the uncomfortable questions about infrastructure, dependency, accountability gaps, and the forces already in motion that most of your peers are treating as someone else's problem. Because the most powerful thing a leader can do in a time of civilizational disruption is to actually understand what is being disrupted and lead accordingly. As we close this episode, let's remember leadership in times of disruption isn't about finding certainty. It's about having the courage, the balls to confront what's uncertain, to question the rules others are writing, and to ask the hard questions your peers may avoid. If you found this episode relevant, please feel free to share with your family, friends, work, colleagues, whoever you want. The more people following the podcast, the more we can spread such important messages. And if you want to know more about the H2H experiment, follow us on LinkedIn, on Substack, also the podcast, so that you can get more insights. You can also join our global community through our website, the h2hexperiment.com, or on the ECXO platform. You can also read our books that are available on Amazon. The future isn't waiting for permission. Those shaping tomorrow's world are acting now, redefining power, building new systems, sometimes right above our heads. What decisions are you avoiding? What uncomfortable truth must you face? If you want to lead, you must do so with civilizational literacy, not just vision. The world is changing faster than consensus can form. Will you step up and change it, or let others decide for you? Thank you for joining us. The conversation obviously does not end here. Please connect with our community, challenge your thinking, and keep exploring what leadership means in this era of radical change. Thank you once again. See you next time. Bye.